Okay, um, guys, I want to welcome you to Poets and Poetry Matters. This is our inaugural interview series starting this week, and this month is going to be Miss Glenis Redmond. And we're going to be talking to her, and I'm just going to give people a few minutes to get into the room. And so you can prepare for this. Poets and Poetry Matters is a series that I'm putting together to basically to honor our 90th anniversary celebration, which is going to be going on all this year. VP of Programming have some excellent programs. So please pay attention to that. Make sure you visit our website at ncpoetrysociety.org so that you can download our e-news, which have a lot of the things that are going to be going on, not only for North Carolina Poetry Society, but for poets across the state. Okay, so these monthly interviews is going to be about talking to poets whose work I feel is very important, more than people realize, about answering the questions about why poetry matters, why poets matter, why this is something that we need to shout and share throughout our communities, not just within the confines of our poetry communities. And so I immediately thought of Glenis as my first guest because I've been really a fan of hers for so long. And so I'm really just very pleased to have her here. And I hope that, I know many of you feel the same way based on the response I've been getting back. And so I'm going to read a little bit about her bio, but you can check her out at her website, glenisredmond.com, and you can find out even more about her, okay? So Glenis is a nationally renowned award-winning poet, and she's a teaching and imagination artist who has traveled the world sharing and teaching poetry. She writes about the strength of Afro-Carolinian roots, and she explores how they're weighted in powerful histories, how their histories, affects our lives, and in so many ways, not only her lives, but how we can all, as humans, can be connected to that. Glenis is a literary community leader. She is dedicated to coaching and uplifting youth poets' voices. She co-founded a literary program called Peace Voices in her hometown of Greenville, South Carolina, from 2012 to 2019. Glenis is also a Kennedy Center teaching artist and a Cave Canaan poet. She has been showcased on NPR and PBS, and most recently in Orion magazine, the North Carolina Literary Review, Obsidian Literature and Arts in the African Diaspora, Story South, About Place, and Carolina Muse. I could go on and on and on, but most recently, she has worked on this great series that's become a book that's going to be put out, that's now able for you to pick it up by, what's the name of your is it Finishing Line? Is there now the
Finishing Line Press? Yes.
Finishing Line Press, and it's called The Three Harriets. And so just based on the write-up about that, I think this is something you just need to check out, because she's going to talk to you a little bit. It's very interesting about an enslaved woman who hid for 7 years to escape her owner. And that reminds me of a historical novel work I read some time ago. So I really am looking forward to really getting into that. So these posts, I said, will be published by Finishing Line. And also she have her latest book called The Listening Skin, which will be published by Four-Way Books in 2022. So I want you to welcome Miss Glenis Redmond. So I'm so grateful you're here. So thank you.
So Stevie, it's so great to share this window with you. So thank you for the invitation, and hello to everyone who's joining us.
And so one of the things that I want to ask is, because I'm very nervous, as I'm sure everybody can tell, but it's a good nervous. It's a good nervous because yes, I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today. I'm excited about what I know people are going to learn today. And that's really why I'm here. So I want you to talk about, how do you become a poet? I know because most people don't wake up and say, well, I'm a poet. So how did that come about for you? You says, one of the things you says, poetry has followed me all the days of my life. So tell me about that.
Well, truly, I believe there's degrees of becoming a poet. Some people like to fix it and say you're either born a poet or you can learn. I think I was born a poet. I think I was born an artist. I think I was born a creative. And I love dance. I love visual art. Very, very early on, maybe from age 4 or 5, that's where I thrived. That was my language. And I believe that even before I was reading and writing, I think I was a poet, because the way I observed the world, the way I paid attention to nature, to human nature, and I would just take snapshots and just catalog them, put them in my mind. And I didn't know why I was doing that, but I would have these observations about the world around me. And then when my teacher in 8th grade had an assignment for us to write in a journal every day, that's when all those moments that I had been storing started pouring onto the page. And my community took me seriously at age 12, 13 as a poet. My church, someone died, I wrote, an elegiac poem. My friends, I wrote poems for them. So very early, I knew that there was something different about me, and I indeed was poetry. But it wasn't until my 30s when I left the counseling field, when I had gotten sick with fibromyalgia, chronic illness, and I had taken some time off, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I heard, Lucille Clifton's iconic poem, "Won't You Celebrate?" And that last line, "Won't you come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." I took that as an extended invitation
Oh, wow.
to the poetry world, and RSVP to Lucille Clifton. And I've been a professional poet ever since.
But that's a brave step. That is a very, very brave step, because nothing in our world tells us that
No.
we should do that. We should pursue that. And I don't care who is, how famous people are. There's nothing, you read their biographies, no one told them they should do that. Everyone really tried to dissuade them. They should go get a real job or whatever. And so that's why it's very important. So you talked about at a young age. So I know you do a lot of your work with young people. So how important do you think that work is? And what is a story you might share with us about that?
Well, I think, the way I've been looking at myself is the introverted and the extroverted part of myself. The introverted part of myself is the person who needs to be away from people, the person, the creative that needs to write. And so I spent a lot of time in that world, in that land of my own imagination. I grew up with that, like I lived in my own world. And then the other part, the extroverted part, is the teaching artist, the performance poet, the one who wants to either wants to be on a stage or in a classroom, giving the work away. So that's the extroverted part of who I am. And I feel like it's important. Everybody doesn't want to do that outreach, but I think as a former counselor, that was second nature for me. It's like, I don't want to keep this craft to myself. It's very liberating. It has grown me up socially, emotionally, and given me agency. And I know that it will do that for others, not just young people, but all people need to strengthen their voice and stand firmer on their own platform. So
I
I
think
find
that's very important. That's very important, because I was thinking about that in terms of how people still now, even especially during the pandemic, people are so closed in themselves, and how that can be an outlet. Do you find yourself writing more, or are you shifting how you write, or how you think people who may not call themselves poets, but how can they use poetry?
Well, I think that everyone can use poetry. I do not care whether you call yourself a poet or not, a writer or not. I love the idea of this fluidity of creativity in our lives. And so as a teaching artist, my goal is to encourage people to not necessarily become a poet, but find the poetry that lives within them. And that makes our lives richer. When you start to reflect on your own circumstances and what's going on around you, it has this ability to allow you to transcend time and to find moments of grace and beauty, even if there's struggle, especially like during this pandemic, but people, I don't think it's therapy, because, as a counselor, I don't really use it as that, but I do think it's a therapeutic tool. And it's a great tool that I think everyone should have in their lives. Just think what our world would be if people just took 5 to 10 minutes every day just to reflect, and then write about it. Like, I think it would make you more in touch with yourself and then also with humanity. So I think it's a tool that should be, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I just think everybody should have poetry in their lives, whether you're
Well,
reading it, just to experience it, whether you want to write it or you want to just share it with someone else. You should have poetry in your life on some level, and even being an appreciator is part of looking at the craft as well, and enriches lives.
I think that's absolutely the way I feel about it as well, because like I said, I still struggle with that idea of being a poet. I write things, but it's like I'm still not sharing as much as I should, because I'm still intimidated by the word poet, because I feel like, it's something, it's such a position that I revere and that I
Yes.
respect. And that's why, my hesitancy. But I'm getting out there. I'll be getting out
You
there.
are. And you know what? I think it'd be, it's beautiful that we take some of that, take some of those layers off of being a poet, so you can slide into that more easily, because that's one of the things that I work with students is embracing that creative side, and embracing saying, I am a poet. I am a creative. That's an affirmation. And when we gain our wings, guess what? We give wings to others by saying that. So when we can stand behind who we are in our words, then we give people permission. And that's what we need. We need this. We need to take this, I don't know what the labeling or the categorization of being an artist, a creative, a poet, yes, I create, yes,
I love that.
I'm a poet.
I love that. So as I say, it's a community building thing, because we
Right.
talk about how we can use it to build just community. It's not, even though it's a very personal thing, but how can we use it to build community? How can we use it to establish community, ways of communicating and being with others?
Well,
So
yeah.
that's my thing.
At the basis, what poetry is storytelling. And what brings communities better than stories? It really does allow us to connect all the different levels of community if we choose. And you can build community through having a reading series, having poets coming in, just like what you're doing. This is building community. You can build community by holding workshops and helping people, work on their skills. You can build community, with having just people simply appreciating poetry and talking and going into schools or different venues to raise the awareness of poetry, which I think creates empathy and compassion. So my inclination is, yes, especially young people, to give them a pen, like someone handed me a pen, allows them to take up a space in the world that they might not have otherwise. Like, even though I was an athlete, I was a cheerleader, there was something about poetry that when I inhabited that space of poetry, I interacted with myself differently. And I felt embraced, not necessarily by the people around me, because they didn't always understand me as a poet, but really my linking arms with Maya Angelou or Nikki Giovanni, or, I felt like I was being embraced by the community of writers that spoke to me. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And for our students, you do not have to read the same poets I read. You have your own tribe that speaks to you. I call it the literary ancestry. So saying that to a student, say, you're not alone. There's someone out there that's already had a thought you've had, already had a feeling you had, and guess what? They've already pinned it on the paper. It could be 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago. So step in and join that community of writers as well. That's community as well. So I felt like I was grown up in Piedmont, South Carolina by those poets that I mentioned, because they started to speak to me and resonate. And I felt like, Maya Angelou, with not just her poetry, but her book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, was speaking to me as a 15-year-old Black girl, saying, you can do this, you can be on this path. So I had role models who I had never met, but I just read their words and they gave me my quote unquote wings.
That's wonderful, because I think poetry is one of the, anytime you have a reason to come together, and it's a non-threatening reason to come together, there's so many things you can do for each other just by coming together. So in and of itself, it's a great community building too. So, I like to think about, you talked about, one of the things I read in your biography, you talked about being, I'm a native of nowhere. What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of things, but native and nowhere really probably stems from my issues with belonging, because I'm an Air Force brat. And so that means that even though I had my formative years in South Carolina, we also lived in Washington State, we lived in Italy, we lived in New Jersey. So I had this place of like, am I a Southerner or not? And yes, I'm Southerner because of lineage. My parents raised me, and wherever we went, there they were. But yet still, I always felt like I was somewhat on the fringe, because I just didn't really understand place like somebody who understood place, who lived in the same place all their lives. So that was different. And then also, I think the native of nowhere is also about the poet, because the poet inhabits, I'm as a poet, really, I'm not a joiner. I don't join a lot of things because I relish this being on the fringe, because I think my lens of observation are keener and stronger there. So that kind of speaks to that native of nowhere. But then I kind of came up with another line after that, dealing with belonging. It's like, I'm a native of nowhere. For a long time, I believe that. But now I know I belong everywhere.
Now that is awesome. That is awesome. Because a lot of us, even though we've been in the same place all our lives, still feel that we're not belonging. And like you said, that whole thing about you building your own ancestry, you're connecting to those who understand where you're coming from, even though you've never met them. And so that's just magical to me. That's just magical.
I had and it really is so weird. I had that epiphany when I was at a silent retreat, in New Mexico. And I said, wow, you need to get over this issue you have with belonging, because you definitely, you're indeed, you belong everywhere. And I think that's the poet. The poet belongs everywhere. Yes, I write about South Carolina, I write about place, I write about North Carolina, I write about place a lot. But in between those spaces, the poet is traveling across time, across cultures, across boundaries all the time in their work. And so it's how I'm beholden without holding on too much.
Yes, because it does give you a license to interact the way you want to, and license to do your own thing, to be as creative. And there's very few things that are like that. Very few things that are like that. I know even when I went to design school, the reason I ended up dropping out is because everyone wanted me to do it their way. Like I said, I thought I came here to learn to do me, not to do you. And it was very frustrating. And
I hear you on that. I think that's, I think that is what a lot of times in the poetry world, people are projecting what they want us to be. And you're trying to be you. And I think sometimes competitions and who gets what award or who gets that might set that dynamic up. But really, for me, and, I'm trying to be the best Glenis poet I can be, not anybody else in mind. Yes, I can be inspired or motivated by someone, but I think we can take a deep breath when we kind of sink into ourselves and say, I'm really trying to push who I'm trying to be.
I was sitting here just thinking about some of the things in some of your work. I mean, you talk a lot about, your life growing up and a lot of just, your reflections on your different life. But also there's a lot of poetry in which you address social justice issues.
Yes.
And so tell me, is it just you just approach it as it comes to you? Is it intentional? How do you find yourself there and develop
You,
those?
I think being born Black in Sumter, South Carolina in 1963 with the racial categorization was Negroid on it, kind of, and born the day before King gave his I Have a Dream speech might have a little bit to do with how I walk in the world and how I show up. Born, I think I look at my birth certificate and it just tells a big story of how I became who I am now. The date, also my weight. I was low birth weight, and so all of us, all five of us were, which tells about a certain social and not economic status, low birth rate, impoverished. So I had, tick all the boxes, just keep ticking them, and it just made me, and then I had a very overbearing militaristic father, and who really tried to silence my voice, who thought women and children should not speak. And I always wanted to speak, and I've been playing with the thing is that I was born in Shaw Air Force Base, 20th Fighter Wing. So I'm a fighter too. And then my name is Glenis, named after Glenis John, Glamorous Glenis, the jet that broke the sound barrier, and a flamboyant actress, Glenis Johns. I mean, come on, no one was going to quell or silence. I mean, many tried, but they were not successful. I'm here to say I'm a poet and I'm loud, but not loud unnecessarily. You can be loud in a whisper.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can scream and rage. And I think all of those things that I mentioned, that's all in me trying to figure out how to live in this world, how to inhabit this space, not by how other people define me, but how I choose to walk in the world with beauty and grace and dignity and compassion and love. That's social justice.
Yes, yes. So what I see, you say, is growing out of your existence. It's not anything you have to seek out to say, okay, I'm going to address this issue, address this issue. It is your life. It is, it's a Black woman's life.
Yes. Yes. I like that. I like the way you put it, a Black woman's life. When you walk into a world looking like you do, then the world comes at you in a certain way. I'll never forget being at University of Delaware, probably 18 years ago. I'm riding around doing the Road Warrior thing, going to a performance for college students. And I was doing something for the campus activities, and I showed up to perform. And it was a young mixed Black and white mixed person young man who said, "I'm so glad you're here. We're so excited. We might not have as many people here because just me putting your picture on the poster is controversial." And
just being yourself, you're controversial.
Just being a Black woman. And that moment. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's like, so no matter what I think I encounter in the world, it gets labeled social justice, but I'm like just trying to survive and thrive and create a lifeline. I don't think my mother and my grandmother would consider what they did social justice when my grandmother brought at the time, colored teacher over from another county because they didn't have one in their county to teach the children how to read and write. And then she fed that teacher, and then that teacher in the evening taught my grandmother how to read and write. She only had a 3rd grade education. But and my grandmother fed the children. She cooked her, she from her own, all that to me is that extension of, feeding the community you come from, raising the community you come from. They didn't have those terms that we use now, but I come from a long line of those kind of women who did for others. And that's what social justice is doing for yourself and doing for others to make the world a better place. And I think it gets politicized, and it's not about politics, or I guess everything's about politics then, because you're really just trying to make a way out of no way,
Yeah, yeah,
as they would say.
So, I guess the question that comes to mind is how, I mean, just as it may cause controversy for some, they see it and they're going to run towards it because. So, what about those people? What are you think they're hoping to find? What is,
Well, when some people see it, yeah, they're like, oh my goodness, I've been waiting on you. I have been living this lonely life and no one's been speaking to me. So yes, I've had droves and droves of young Black women, young Black men who just, when I'm there, they're just soaking it up because they just don't have that experience. And I have others, I call my others. It doesn't matter skin tone. They're like artists, disabled, I'm a fringe person because of my sexual orientation, anything, they're just like, I need an other, and you look like another, and they just flock. And and they'll stand and talk to me as long as their teachers, their professors will let them, because they're just hungry. They haven't been given the bread. They haven't been given the water of acceptance and being embraced for who they are, unique and beautiful, not controversial, but a unique member of the human family. And here I am to affirm you. So yeah, they're looking for affirmation. And you know what? I'm going to give it to them because I give what I wanted to be given.
And some people come for education. I'm going to tell you, some people do come for education because like I said, it's not something that you feel fearful of. If you're an artist, even no matter what your ethnic or racial background is, you can connect with another artist. So sometimes they come really to be educated. People of all different walks and backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds, they welcome you because they say, well, she has something, she knows something I don't have, and I want to know what that is. And that's how we grow, is that we borrow from each other, we learn from each other. That leads me to that next question about the whole thing between, you say your feet are firmly planted on both the page and the stage. And so let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's interesting way to walk. When I was writing poetry and performing poetry before I even knew what a poetry slam was, but people had already labeled me a slam poet, a spoken word artist, or whatever. And I just happened to bump up against slam and enjoyed it because it reminded me a lot of my own background of being raised in a Black Baptist church where, the ministers, can I get a witness? Can I get an amen? And we're talking back, and if we're not talking back, he's asking us like, ain't nobody with me. I wish I had a praying church today, and so I really came from, that culture, connected to my lineage of West Africa, the griot tradition. So there's this really, I've never used the word spoken word artist. I believe I use the word poet. I don't mind the word performance poet but people think I'm performing when you can see right now, as I'm talking to you, I get animated, and that's not a performance. And that's how I deliver my poetry. So I make no apologies for being who I am on that side, but I also love my work to grow and be fiercely crafted. And I appreciate my teachers and all of the workshops that I've attended to grow myself in that craft. So I have taken time to work both areas of craft, because doing slam for, I don't know how long I did it, and a decade, and then also doing poetry alive, where we took poetry into the classrooms, and I did 3 shows a day, 5 days a week of contemporary, classical poetry. So that gave me a master's degree in performance poetry. And there is a craft to it. And I don't think we speak a lot about that craft of giving the art form away in that way. And I'm passionate about that. And I don't think, a lot of times it gets denigrated because a lot of folks say, well, oh, those people don't work on the page, so their work is not relevant. But, you can't project onto others what you do in poetry. Everybody has their own, what they want. There are hip hop poets, there's spoken word artists, there's performance poets. There's all kind of, in that realm of what people call performance poetry, there's levels in that too. It's not one thing. So and then I'm very intensely introverted as well. So I love the quiet poems that sometimes I'll read them and they very rarely get read at a reading, you know, but sometimes I'm in the mood and I'll read that. But I went back and got my master's degree at Warren Wilson when my daughters graduated from high school. And I didn't do that because I wanted to, you know, I was already making a living in poetry. So, but I was doing that for my own craft, like, and I learned from some wonderful people, and the people I learned from the most were people who are not trying to change me, but the people who are trying to help strengthen my work, you know. And so voila, I mean, that's how you stand in both places and believe in both places.
I think it was Miss Holiday who said something about the fact, if I'm going to sing like everyone else, then why bother to sing at all? Of course, I paraphrase, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I think that's what poetry, they were all poets to try to do. So yes, we're going to study different people, and we might study their different styles, and we might even emulate some of it. But in the final production, it should be us, you know, it should be what represents us. And so, so what do you say to maybe someone who's watching and say, well, you know, I've got this journal I've been, you know, writing in since I was 13, but I never showed anyone, or I've had someone who tragically showed someone their work, and they took it and never gave it back to them. So people have been wounded a lot about, and they feel so sensitive about their work. So what can you say to someone who is timid about continuing to, you know, to put themselves out there with their work?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, number one, I think figure out what it is you want to do. If you want, do you want to publish more poetry and you don't want to read, or do you want to read, or do you just want to write, or, you know, do you want to create community from it? So figure out what you want to do and then be about doing that. To get stronger, I do recommend workshops, but I recommend that you do a little research before you take a workshop with someone. Find out if they're a gracious, compassionate, empathetic workshop leader. You don't want to work with someone who's going to tear you down. You know, you don't work with someone who only leads with just, you know, hard, you know, it's about growing. It's not about cutting someone down. It's not about, you know, so figuring out what workshop styles do you like the most, you know, generative workshop versus like editing workshop. Those are vastly different things, you know. So find out and find a group of people. And if it's not out there, create your group, you know. Find a group that you like and you want to, you know, spend time with, and they help you feel more comfortable going out there. But I tell you one thing, the only way to get comfortable reading your work is to read your work. It's like push-ups. You know, the only way to get good at push-ups, do push-ups. Like you have to get out there and put your hours in, because that's part of the craft. So you know, it's one of the things is the more you do it, you can take the emotions out of it and say, yeah, I'm scared, but I really love doing this and I want to do it. So weigh your fear and love of things and let love always win.
Sounds wonderful. That's some great things. So I want to make sure you have enough time to share some of your works with us. You want to read whatever it is you want to share with us?
Yeah, sure. I can read. I have the North Carolina Literary Review. I thought that would be on top, on task. I was featured in 2019, and there's an interview in here. Oh, this is a beautiful. If you can get this one, get it. Because you know, so many of our beloveds are in here. Randall Keenan, you know, and
yes.
Jackie Shelton bringing her daughters on the front. You know, there's just, so And then my friend Lisa Saracen interviewed me in this one, and so there's a long interview in it. So if you want to know more about my journey as a poet, please check it out. And North Carolina Literary Review has been one of my poetic homes. It's been in my and that's the other thing I would encourage other people to do is find your homes, the places that embrace you. So yeah, I've got a Harriet poem. This one is for Harriet E. Wilson. And if people don't know, she was the first African-American novelist. And so I'll read a poem. One of the moments I had writing poems about her was found out that she considered herself psychic. And then she had also lost her father, and her father came and talked to her, after he died. So this poem is called Dreams Speak My Father's Words. I had to coax my heart open to see what my bones already know. Follow how the blood road travels back to understand how the tree root shoots from solid ground. If I stand still long enough, I can feel how the earth turns by my father's dark hand. How he lifts the veil so I can stare into the worlds, between the worlds. The branch bottles hold his clear voice as he dreams speaks in my ear. Shows me how destiny's wheel turns, how trouble will hound me many of my days, how grief will rob me of my son, my beloved held at my breast, how work will do its best to beat my body down. He says trouble will stand next to me like kin. Bedridden, I will beg to die, but he chants, fair daughter, you will rise. You will rise and follow the leaves. The call of my dream voice will guide you to trace your palms. Close your eyes. Feel the pulse. See how the future connects to your strong lifeline. Your legacy will be blown on bottles, etched in books, gifts held by others. You will be known as the earnest, eloquent, clairvoyant. On this dirt path paved, you will capture what the world hands you. Navigate the heart. Palms smooth jagged rocks into fortune. Divine daughter, dance between the worlds. Curtains drawn open. Peer, gain inner sight. See how at the core all turns and turns.
That was awesome. That was just awesome. And I just, oh, wow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That story really is one of the books I've read, and it's really has haunted me for a long time. It's one I keep coming back to. It's so much depth to that story. I'll talk to you about that, one of the things I drew out of it sometimes later, but
yeah, her story is an interesting one, and and that book is really a tough book. The title, Our Neg, it's a tough. Everything's, she persevered in so many ways, and what's the travesty is that young people don't even know about her in the Black community. A lot of people don't know. If you took a poll who Harriet E. Wilson would not know. So that's a travesty. And that's one of the reasons why I, do the type of poems I do.
So that's the thing too, is like, sometimes people think, they have this narrow view of what a poet is. I think a poet is just, poets, a lot of times, poets do just talk about those things that they know and they reflect on things they've had, but also sometimes poets do research.
Right.
Poets are, all kinds, there's all kinds of poets, work all kinds of ways. I mean, some of the best poets I know have been scientists.
Yes. Yes.
So people seem to think have this narrow view, oh, because I'm doing this. If you dig a ditch, you can still write a poem.
That's right.
If you're doing surgery, you
Right.
can still
You can
write
write.
a poem.
Exactly.
It's very democratic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not either or kind of life. You can express your creative side. And I just make a case for that more of this history enter into the mainstream, so it won't be so jarring for folks, to understand like who people are. I tend to, have an African American bend, not always, but mostly, because there are so many stories just calling up from the land, like saying, witness me or speak, and I think it's important. So one day maybe I'll walk into a university and they don't say, you're controversial just by who you are when you show up. Yeah.
I think you talked about earlier about poems being storytelling, and also it's about telling one's history. You can share your personal history, your community history, your ancestral history, and I think that's very important. People don't realize, what you can do, what you should do, what you should consider at least.
Well, I think I'm the family genealogist. I feel like I do. I'm interested in all the old photos, and my mother's 85, and I just sit with her because I know that she's kind of my last connection to the family who lived that story. And so every time I sit with her, either have a pen or I'm asking her questions, and I find something that new all the time. And this is stuff that's not even in history books. So she leaves, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so many ways to do research. And one is to interview your family members if you're interested in genealogy. That's just so important. And I started pretty early, but I wish I would have started even earlier. When my dad died, I lost a wealth of knowledge because he really knew how everybody was related. He knew all, the history of the town, all of those sorts of things. So that I think that's pressing. And then there's other research that I think is more that no one really talks about, but it's the mystical craft, like what's in the ethers, what's in the muse, what comes to you. And I think that's research too. We don't always call it that, but when you sit and listen to these voices, to the land, to the history that swirls around you, that's a different kind of research. And then there's the traditional research. So to me, it's very layered type of research of getting knowledge. And the more knowledge you gain, I think the more it informs what you're going to put on the page.
I know it's a lot of trend now towards Afrofuturism in poetry as well as in other art forms. So have you kind of like tackled that, or do you have some favorites?
I just got this in the mail last week. It is the future of Black Afrofuturism, Black comics and superhero poetry, and then Lynn Lawson, Cynthia Manick, and Gary Jackson are the editors. So I would not say that is just my genre, but I'm fascinated about how we inhabit the future. I love fantasy and sci-fi, especially connected to Octavia Butler. So when I see people writing in this vein, I think it's really powerful. I do have a poem in here, but it's really connected to my this illness that I've been battling, cancer, multiple myeloma. And so my contribution in here is how to become your own superhero, Shiro.
Yes.
So I think it's important for us to envision ourselves in the future. And I love the Afrofuturism, Afro-punk. I feel a little, dated to be saying that, but I think it also talks about how the Black community is not a monolith. We're not all conservative. We're not all traditional. We are everything that you can think of. Even, me, I came from a very conservative, traditional background, but I bumped up against it because I was always having these thoughts and ideas that weren't in line with where I came from. And so it's lovely to see this next generation claiming the space, you know, and I felt like, oh, well, I think I'm part of the space, because it goes back to that thing about when we talk about being other or not belonging anywhere, like, you know, belonging in the future and space, that just, you know, I think that is the most radical thing you can do, is imagine Black people in the future, you know, and how we inhabit, because, you know, it's important. It's important
very
for
important, very important.
especially the younger generation. And, you know, for, I can't tell you the long, you know, that old joke when you're watching any kind of movie and there's a Black person on it, who's going to die first?
That's a joke in my house, you know. So, oh well, you know what's gonna happen.
You know what's gonna happen. And we laugh to keep from crying, but it's true. And it's the Afrofuturism is like claiming a space where we are not the ones who die first.
Not necessarily the one that's gonna die first. I think that some
Exactly.
stars have made that point, you know. I know specific stars, you know, say, well, no, I'm not going to die. You know,
right, in the
I'm not
contract.
gonna sign this contract unless
That's right. I'm gonna live, and I'm gonna live abundantly. So we need representation matters.
Representation does matter. It really does matter. That's really, really good. I know some friends of mine who don't really love that talk about, because I know they really want to hear about your take on Afrofuturism. Do you want to share something? You want to share that one?
Sure. Let me see if I can find it. I didn't have it out. Let me see where I am in here. It's a lovely book too. It's more like a magazine. I think they're doing it like a graphic, you know, kind of like a graphic.
I'll try to get that down and put it into the event so people can, you know, all these resources that you're.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fantastic poets in here. Like I haven't even made my way through it. I've been reading a little bit of it, but there's some just on the back, there's Lucille Clifton. They included Lucille Clifton because she wrote about Superman, Nikki Giovanni, Yona Harvey, Terrence Hayes, Ashley Jones, Van Jordan, Tracy Smith, Frank X. Walker, Keith Wilson. So there's some really, really, really fine poets in here. And the poem I wrote came out of me battling cancer. How to become your own superhero. Facing death, I know there is more to life than what we all can see. In the ethers, I hold on to invisible threads of what mama and grandma passed down. Gold and silver cords of hope, courage, and faith. With multiple myeloma, I have lost more than the 20-year-old locks that hung down my back. I have lost my hand and heart, extended for 27 years, taking poetry to students across the country, across the world. I lost the music in my smooth stroll. I have not danced for 10 months. I've lost my breath, the capacity of my lungs, punished by pneumonia twice. I lost my hair, my bald head looks outright stares. People can't hide their questions or hide the horror scrawled on their faces. My self-portrait is Frida Kahlo-esque. My illness turns me inside out, paints both seen and unseen. I am surreal. I am lesions on skull, clavicle, and femur. I am cracked bone and marrow siphon. I am weekly blood draws. I have had to hold my own hand to save my own life. 2.5 million stem cells needed. I summon 12.5 million, a record. Don't believe them when they say this procedure will not hurt. I am high-dose chemotherapy. If the cure of cancer does not kill me, I'll heal. The shadows on my face are maps where I have walked, landings without light. 53 days later, after the stem cell, I am lighter. I am a shapeshifter on this path I did not choose. Yet between the veils, I morph into this dreamlike mist. I feel like both angel and ancestor already. Time is surreal. I am glad to escape death this go round, but I saw the grim reaper twice, his scythe ready to level me. I have come through this cancerous fire, finished in the kiln at the highest heat, a hard-won beauty, lit from within. I duck and dodge and summon strength as a Wakanda warrior, a Maasai woman, Southern sage. I meet the looks I get with a direct gaze. Stare translated. If cancer couldn't kill me, you sure can't.
That is just, that just blows me away, because I know, I was following your page a lot when you were going through that. And so I kind of like follow your trajectory through that. And um, you gave me a lot of hope, for things I was going through, because you faced with such strength. I mean, I can know, it's scary. I know it's the most vulnerable thing, but you still stood, and you was able to share that. And I'm telling you, I'm sure that you have benefited a lot of people because you were strong enough. Whether you were strong, you did it. No matter what,
Right.
I don't know what was going in inside of you, but you stood, and that made a big difference to a lot of people. It really did.
Thank you for that, because some people are very private about their journey, and of course I didn't tell everything, but I tell a lot. I said I'm a public figure, and a teaching artist, and a community member. I'm going to share this journey with the people who supported me, and I'm going to share the insides and out of it, and hopefully to give hope, or just be with somebody during their own struggle. And I am working on a book about the whole cancer journey. It's called Bloom Anyhow, and that will probably be prose and poetry. It probably, but when you go through something so severe that that you might not be here, you got to figure out what you stand on. And I realized that I always have been standing on firm ground. And and people say, well, how could you be so upbeat? I said, well, I was upbeat before I got cancer. So it didn't change the nature of who I was.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you have anything else you want to share? I'm sorry, I got you off your list.
Sure. No worries. That's a great. I thought that was a great segue to. I have another poem in here. It's for the most famous Harriet, and Harriet Tubman, and I'm very very I don't know, connected to the other Harriets, Harriet Jacobs and Harriet E. Wilson, are very important. But Harriet Tubman resides in a very different place of my heart than the other two. And I don't know if it's because she looks like my grandmother, or what my grandmother looked like when she was living. And I kind of feel like I know Harriet on my grandma level. I just feel like we share some DNA, although there's probably no actual DNA, but mystical, spiritual DNA. Okay, every one of my names, because she had all these names. So one day I was just meditating on all of her names that have been given to her. And I think when somebody gives you nicknames or whatever, that's a high honor, And so this is what we have given to Harriet. Every one of my names I earned, except the first, Araminta Ross, given to me at birth. Didn't take too much to it, because it sounds like a flower standing in the field. Araminta. Got God's covering, though. I keep the prayer music from it. For short, they call me Minty. I like how that sing got more of my sting. I stood up to the master, no matter who was wrong. He head-butted me into dreams and visions. Took Tubman from my man. My husband left me because I wouldn't stay put. He wanted me rooted to his need and the cabin. Lord knows I loved him. God knows he loved me too, but I was meant for more. I belong to the many. They calls me Harriet. I took Harriet from my mama. Her love circled around me like my wrap around my head, like my shawl hugged my shoulders. They called me brave because I wrapped my long arms around my peoples. This how I stand, rooted and ready for battle. This how I love, fitted for the fight. My face ain't fixed on pleasing. What good is a smile in war? I busy with battle. Call me conductor too, because I had this foot train. With hounds at my butt, bloody feet, I runs and I runs and I runs. And I told Frederick Douglass once, I ain't never lost a passenger. I know which way is north with my ear to God's mouth. General too, they call me, because I head where no woman's supposed to be. But I outsmart every slaver's hump. Fear for what? Once I break chains, they minds be next. No matter what they call me, my mind is fixed on a mission. If they even thinking about turning back, I point pistol to head and say, a dead Negro tells no tale. This the way my spirit rise up. My fire be both a curse and a blessing. This fire burns, never snuffed out. They call me Moses too, because my people must go free. They whisper, spy too, when they speak of me, because I got my hands in so many plots. They give me names, so many names, most of them managed, but by God's grace I go with a long skirt with these hands to answer every call. All woman.
I mean, all of them was awesome, but wow, I love, I mean, she's like, I think about women like her. It's just like, I can't even imagine. I just get, how could she be? How could she have existed? How could she do what she did? It's like, if I could just have an ounce of that. Oh my goodness.
You got it. You got it. And that's to me, that's the most of Afrofuturism, you know, because without a Harriet, like how did Harriet do all that? Like how did she do that? She was she was guided supernaturally, you know, and that to me is part of our future. It was mystical. It was mystical. She didn't write poems, she was the poem.
She was the poem. She was the poem.
She did that and showed us what we could do, you know, and that's the beauty, you know, that's the beauty.
That's just awesome. That is awesome. I
don't think you can get any more futuristic than that. I don't think you can.
I don't think you can. I don't think you can. I don't think you can.
That's hope. When we sit and fix our minds on a Harriet Tubman, and sit there and go, look, I got a house, I got a roof over my head, I got food. This woman out reading the lay of the land on her palm, can't read or write, and can, you know, because she had those spells too, you know. So that's when she believed God talked to her. So she had to lay quiet when she had those spells, and then she would know which way to go. So she had a lot of supernatural forces helping her. She had the faith, she had God, and she went straight into that. She did not mind giving that over to the Lord, you know. That's what she believed, you know, and I believe it too, because she did it. She did her thing.
She did that thing.
And one piece, it's not in the book, but I want to write a poem. And when she got to Canada, she married a younger man.
Ooh.
So Harriet Tubman was doing all things with her life. She created that, you know, that highway out of no, you know, she created a highway from no way, you know. It's like, I don't know, or outer space from no way, because I don't know, she operated in spaces none of us.
And a whole different level plane. She really did. Whole different plane.
She did.
Higher plane than some of us are doing now. So it's like,
right.
Oh my goodness, but that was just awesome, to say the least. You know, I had to give you extra on that one.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Hold it in on the other one a little bit, but that was just like, oh my goodness. So if anything else you want to share now, this is your time.
Well, like poem or what?
A poem. Yeah,
okay. I do. Let's see. I have one of the people I've been writing about lately is a guy by the name of David Drake. He was an enslaved potter poet. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he wrote in couplets, and we don't know why or how he was able to write, but we think his owner owned a printing. We know his owner owned a printing press, and he learned to read and write from there. But it's just very interesting that now his pots we have 20 in our museum here in Greenville, and
Oh,
the
wow.
Smithsonian has 2. Like these pots are like worth 350,000 north of that, very easily, which I find ironic of this man who was enslaved and then learned to write. So I have an iconic poem that I wrote for him, but I'm not going to do it. You can find it online. It's on Drunken Boat. Just look Praise Dave by Glenis Redmond, or you can find me doing it next to the pot. So in the museum,
Okay.
So you can find that. So I'm going to read two that I think are, because he wrote in couplets. So this book that's coming out, it's all done in couplets. It's done to Jonathan Green, the Gullah landscape artist, artwork of Dave. And so I wrote these poems. I'll just do 2.
Okay.
They're shorter. One is called Recipe for Writing. Because every enslaved person had a lot of enslaved people, I shouldn't say all of them, had many jobs that they did. And so before he was a potter, he was a brick mason. So this is called Recipe for Writing. I mix mortar to make bricks, 1 part water, 2 parts grit, a whole mess of the sweat off my brow. Stir and stir, my mouth be turned so the whole lot sit just right. Before they dry, levels them, then go to school on them. No paper, just wet slate. No pen, stick. Writes D-A-V-E. Writes it over and over and over again. Ain't easy, but with these letters, I learns to steady my hand. Then I stack them bricks even like, one on top of the other, and know from miles where white people lay their head, they surrounded by my name.
Oh, my goodness.
So it's like this whole thing of like kind of getting into not this person just being an enslaved person, that this person had aspirations and dreams and hopes just like everyone else. So this last one here is called I Master for David Drake, and he's speaking I'm writing a lot in persona in this collection. It's called I Master. Who drives the whip? Be at the helm. Work harder, boy. Don't nobody has to tell me. Back into this clay, I shoulder this grind. See my pots, and you'll know I's yoked not by lash, but by every chamber of my heart. What my mouth don't say, my hands do. My pots be what most people ain't. Hold. Head down, eyes lifted up higher than the one trying his best to beat me down. Into each mound, I pull a body into being. With these hands burns a fire that can't be put out. Sometimes I get puffed up, wild turkey like. I do my best to smooth my feathers down, bend myself around prayer. Here I stand, closest to the Lord, my one true master. He turns the world, I spin this wheel. As I breathe life into these lumps, I too, from mud, make miracles.
That is just too awesome. Well, Glenis, we've been here about a little bit over an hour now.
Yes, we have.
It went so fast. It went so fast. And I'm so glad that you came here. You really have shared a lot with us, a lot of us to think about, a lot of us to take forth in what we're doing. I would like to say, you're a poet, you're a teaching artist, you're an imagination artist. But I also call you a prophet and a documentarian, because you have laid out so much for us to think about and to apply going forward, and to think about our own past and how we can connect with that in such an important way. Again, this has been Glenis Redmond, and you can find her at glenisredmond.com. Is that correct?
Yes,
And
that's
you can find
correct.
all her work. She has a new book coming out called The Three Harriets, and look out for our new collections coming out later this year as well. So make sure you keep in touch with her. And also, this is Celestine Davis. I'm president of North Carolina Portrait Society. Make sure you check our website out at ncportraitsociety.org. Find out about what we're going to be doing for the 90th anniversary. Program is put together by VP of Programming Linda Rush Myers. And make sure you check out that membership page, because Joan Barasowski, I always mess up her name, but she forgives me every time, thank goodness, because she's really excellent at our membership. She really makes sure you get everything that you're entitled to as a member. And so make sure you visit that page and click on those two places for our eMuse and also the membership page. So again, thank you so much, Glenis, for being with us. And please come back anytime. I hope to see you in North Carolina Portrait Society somewhere in the near future.
Thank you so much for having me, Celestine. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All
All right,
right.
I guess I better go off before they just shut me out. Have a good day now.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.